All right, so now let's get into the cerebral cortex. So the cerebral cortex is basically the human part of the brain. It's the very top layer of your brain, and it's made up of densely packed neurons called gray matter because they look gray and because they're mostly dendrites and cell bodies, whereas axons that are myelinated appear white. It contains wrinkles called fissures, and those fissures are there to increase the surface area of our brain. Basically, that means that if you lay out the brain and unwind all of those wrinkles, those fissures, our brain would be about the size of a pizza. But the good news is that we don't have a pizza-sized head. We got all those fissures to compact all of that into our nice-sized brain so we don't look funny. We divide the cerebral cortex into 2 hemispheres and 4 lobes. So the 4 lobes are the frontal lobe, which is in the front, the parietal lobe, which is in the middle, the temporal lobe, which is where your temples are right here, and then your occipital lobe, which is in the back part of your head. Those are the 4 areas. Within each area, within each lobe, you have association areas that are on all 4 lobes, and they act to combine or coordinate sensory and motor information. So there's a lot of interneurons in those association areas. Our frontal lobe right here is the smartest part of our brain. It deals with planning, reasoning, motor skills, language, maintaining emotional control. So this is the part of your brain that is actually going to override that amygdala back here. Remember I said in the last video that the amygdala was anger and fear and aggression? Well, we have this frontal lobe that's going to try and control that. And it also helps us have abstract thought. That means that I can visualize what a heart looks like without seeing it. That's what abstract is. Damage to this area can alter personality. There was a guy, Phineas Gage, and we'll do a little case study on him. He's a very interesting guy. Basically, he had a tamping iron from a railroad go right through his frontal cortex, or his frontal lobe right here. And he essentially turned into like a guy who was super aggressive. He was kind of mean. He gambled. He did really, really risky behavior and all of this kind of stuff. And it just changed his personality entirely. All right, so frontal lobe, think front of your head. It contains Brocas area. Brocas area allows a person to speak smoothly and fluently. So boca means mouth. And so in Spanish, so we'll remember that because we'll remember that that helps us speak fluently. Broca's aphasia is basically where that part of your brain doesn't work. And then you can't understand what other people say. And you can understand what other people say. So the understanding is there, but you can't control the production of your own words. Like you can't move your mouth and your tongue and everything in the right way to say the words you want to say. It also contains the motor cortex. So the motor cortex is the part of the brain in the frontal lobe that tells your body what to do. So it's technically in the frontal lobe, but you can kind of think of it between the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. It's telling my body how I'm going to move. Now, before I move on to the parietal lobe, I do want to go over the fact that you have right up here at the very front of your frontal lobe is called the prefrontal cortex. And your frontal lobe does not fully form until the ages of 23 and 25. That's why children and teenagers do not have good emotional control. That's why teenagers can get angry very quickly and fly off the handle, and their emotions swing all over the place because their frontal lobe isn't fully formed. So our goal as parents is typically to keep you from making really stupid decisions that would ruin the rest of your life before your frontal cortex catches up. Once your frontal cortex can catch up, then you can kind of keep down some of that aggression, and you can have logical processing thoughts and think in the future. One of the things you can't do as you're growing up is think about things in the future. So your frontal lobe is not fully formed, so you're not thinking about the future. The only thing is here and now. Once your frontal lobe fully forms, you can think about how your actions today might affect your future. Parietal lobes. So think about the perimeter of the head. So it's located on the top of the head and contains the sensory cortex, which processes sensory information. Sensory cortex is located next to the motor cortex, which is good because we're processing sensory information here and we're getting information about what to do about it in the motor cortex. We have the angular gyrus in the parietal lobe as well. We have a somatosensory cortex, which is essentially next to, it's the sensory cortex that I was talking about a second ago. They just added somato in front of it. It's right next to the motor cortex. It's the part of the brain that deals with touch sensations from the rest of the body. So somato means body, and then sensory. So we'll have it right next to the motor cortex here. All right. Basically, this is a really complicated thing to explain to you, that the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. Okay, the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. All right. This is a sensory homunculus. Basically, this is a picture of what we would look like if the amount, it's about the amount of space your brain needs to operate all the parts of your body. So your face and your hands are the largest part of your body. And that's how much space your brain needs. And your head, your nose, your mouth, all of those are huge. And just like dealing with the senses and things from your arms and your legs is not all that much. The more sensitive the body region, the larger the sensory cortex area is needed to devote to it. So your lips are huge in this picture because they are extremely sensitive body regions. That's why no one gets a shot in the lip. You don't go, yes, please give me my COVID vaccine in my lip. No way. That would hurt too badly because you have so many sensors in your lips. Your temporal lobes are by your temples. They process sound, sensed by the ears, obviously, and receives information from the opposite ear. So the temporal lobe on the left receives information coming in from your right ear. It's interpreted in a place called the auditory cortex. It also contains Wernicke's area. So this interprets written or spoken speech. So whereas Brokaw's would not allow us to speak, this is not going to allow us to interpret or understand speech. So if you have Wernicke's aphasia, which means your Wernicke's area is broken, then you're unable to understand language. Okay, so everything is kind of going to be all jumbled together and it's not going to make any sense. Your occipital lobes occupies the back of your head. The back of your head, the occipital lobe is almost entirely devoted to your vision. Okay? So you can actually think eyes in the back of your head because the occipital lobe is in the back of your head and it almost exclusively deals with vision. That's where your visual cortex is. If you get hit hard enough back here in this back part of your brain, you could actually go blind. It handles all the visual input from the eye. Of course, the right half goes to the left lobe and vice versa because the right part of your brain controls the left side of your body and all that. All right, so we went through all of this. These are the major association areas. Brokaw's, which is the speaking, Wernicke's, the understanding, and the angular gyrus, which we didn't really get into. The major cortex areas, motor, sensory, visual, auditory. We went through all of those as we kind of went along. Now, your brain is divided into hemispheres, left and right. The left controls the right side and vice versa. The left side controls mostly logic and reasoning, mathematical and sequential tasks and languages. And then your right side is spatial ability, creativity, artistic ability, and reading emotions. So there is a dominant part of your brain. There is a hemisphere that is more dominant in your brain. And what that means is that that hemisphere is the one that your body goes to make the majority of the decisions, okay? So if you are a left hemisphere dominant, then you are, in general, you have a great like verbal memory. Like if I said, what did somebody tell you? Then you can say exactly what they told you. But if you're right hemisphere dominant, you'd be like, well, she had an attitude because she was like moving her head and shaking her finger, but you couldn't remember exactly what she said, but you could remember what that person looked like. Okay. If you're left hemisphere dominant, you're going to look at words you're going to look at letters in groups of words. But right hemisphere dominant people are just better at emotions, emotional expression. So in general, left hemisphere dominant people are less emotional, and they're much more rules oriented. They're very mathematical and scientific in their approach. Orderly, that sort of thing. Right hemisphere dominant, super creative, super emotional. Shapes and patterns make sense to them. Spatial abilities. So your right brain tries to, so if you look at the chart and say the color, not the word, if you just pause the video and give it a try, you will see that it is very difficult. So how did it go when you pause the video? Your right brain is going to try to say the color, but your left brain is like, no, this is the word. The word is yellow, even though it's in green, right? Now, let's talk about split brain patients. So the corpus callosum is going to be what attaches the right and the left brain. So if a corpse is lying down, all right, and your corpus callosum is going to be right in the middle, dividing those hemispheres, okay? That's the corpus callosum if we just cut the brain right like that. If you remove that, you have a split brain patient. And that procedure is called a hemispherectomy. They don't do it a lot anymore, but they do it in extreme cases of epilepsy. Because a lot of times the issue is with the communication between one or the other side of the brain. The split brain surgery leaves with two separate minds because it's just a total crazy thing. Because if you think your brain, if you cut it down in the middle, remember the left side's supposed to control the right side and the right side's supposed to control the left side, right? So let's look at this. So those due to epilepsy have their corpus callosums removed. You have to realize that the visual area in the right hemisphere is supposed to see is supposed to see basically the left visual field. So what does that look like in reality? So if you put a split brain patient here and you put something on their left-hand side, you have to remember your verbal side of your brain is your left hemisphere and the nonverbal side is your right, okay? So if you put something on the right-hand side, it goes into the nonverbal part. It goes into this side of the brain and they're like, nope, we didn't see it. But but they can pick it up. So they'll say, I didn't see anything. But they kind of did see something and then they would pick it up. They would pick up what they saw because they still have that motor ability. But if you put it on the other side, they could say, I saw a baseball, but then they couldn't go pick up a baseball that they saw. It's really bizarre. It's really bizarre.